Ever wish you could just like drop some serious knowledge bombs at your next history hangout?
Yeah.
Well, today's deep dive is going to be your shortcut to sounding absolutely brilliant on a treaty that's way more interesting than it usually gets credit for.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Treaty of Ghent.
And trust me, this isn't just some dusty old history. The Treaty of Ghent, the one that was supposed to end the War of 1812, well, it's had these ripple effects that, believe it or not, reach right into issues we're dealing with today, especially when we really start to unpack what it meant, or actually what it didn't mean for Native Americans.
Okay, so for those of us who maybe need a little refresher, the War of 1812, that was basically round two between the U.S. and Britain, right?
Yeah.
But what I find really fascinating about this whole treaty is how both sides somehow managed to claim victory. How does that even work? How does a treaty where seemingly no one really wins actually play out in the end?
Well, the really interesting thing here is how the Treaty of Ghent, at least on the surface, seems to just sort of hit a reset button on everything. Pre-war boundaries, no land changes hands. Essentially, everything goes back to the status quo. And this is precisely what allowed both the British and the Americans to shape these narratives of success.
So it's almost as if the Treaty of Ghent was prioritizing, like, public perception over actually addressing some pretty volatile issues that were simmering underneath.
Exactly. Britain could come out and say, hey, we defended Canada, we won, and meanwhile the US could turn around and be like, well, we won the Battle of New Orleans, we're strong. But this whole carefully crafted narrative of going back to normal, it really glossed over some massively important issues that the treaty completely ignored.
And I'm guessing those issues had some pretty major consequences down the road. What's the story there?
Yeah, one of the most glaring things that the Treaty of Ghent just leaves out is anything to do with Native Americans. Like, their concerns just weren't even addressed.
It really makes you think, I mean, for Native Americans, this whole war wasn't just some like simple choice between siding with the US or Britain.
Right.
Our sources really drove home the point that they had a way bigger stake in how this whole thing shook out.
Oh, absolutely. For Native Americans, this was about survival. This is about their land. This was about their future. And there's this one guy who really exemplifies this, Tecumseh. He was a Shawnee leader with incredible vision. He understood that to resist the United States, they had to be completely united.
So like a united front against westward expansion.
Exactly. He spends years putting together this huge alliance of different Native American nations, a pan-tribal confederacy.
Right.
And he wanted this confederacy to stand as a buffer state right between the US and Canada. And the way he saw it, an alliance with Great Britain, who still controlled a good chunk of North America at the time, that was the key to making it all work.
Makes you wonder, what if Tecumseh had survived to be there at the treaty? Like, what could have been different?
Oh man, that's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? But no. Sadly, Tecumseh was killed in 1813, and it was a huge blow to the entire movement. And when they signed that Treaty of Ghent, it's like all his work, all his vision, just gone. Like it never even happened. No land rights, no recognition, nothing.
Wow. So they fought, and they were completely disregarded in the peace talks.
Pretty much.
What happened after?
It was bad. Without the British, the dream of this big, powerful Native American nation, it just fell apart. And that left them completely vulnerable to, you guessed it, the United States and their desire to just keep moving west. That treaty, I mean, it was supposed to bring peace, right? But it really just opened the door for even more conflict and displacement of Native Americans for decades to come.
It's crazy how often that happens. So basically, the Treaty of Ghent brought peace between the U.S. and Britain. But for Native Americans, it kind of backfired.
Yeah, it's like it opened up a whole new can of worms.
Because without the British there to back them up, and with nothing protecting them in the treaty, the U.S. was basically free to expand west however they wanted.
It was like a green light. And that's how you get some of the ugliest parts of U.S. history, like the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears. I mean, forcing entire nations off their land,
It's heartbreaking. And it makes you think, if someone like Tecumseh had been at that table in Ghent, things could be so different,
Totally.
Our sources mention some other major figures from that time too. Leaders who could have been representing Native Americans at those talks. Who were these guys?
Well, there was Tenskwatawa. He was Tecumseh's brother. People called him the prophet. He was really important in getting all those tribes to unite. And then you have Black Hawk, a Sauk leader.
Oh, God.
He was all about resistance, fighting back against the U.S. He actually said, "We did not expect to be driven from our villages and firesides, but we're determined to defend them."
Wow. I mean, that really hits you in the gut. It wasn't just about the land. It was their homes, their whole lives.
Exactly. And then there was Keokuk. He was another Sauk leader, but he was more into diplomacy, so a very different approach than Black Hawk. We also have Little Turtle, a Miami chief. He was known for being super strategic. He'd actually won battles against the U.S. back in the 1790s.
Oh, kidding.
Oh, yeah. And then you've got Red Jacket. He was this powerful Seneca orator who was a huge advocate for his people, the Six Nations. He was really against assimilation. And last but not least, there's Pushmatara, a Choctaw chief. He was known for being a really skilled negotiator. So each of these men, they had their own perspective, their own way of approaching this really complex relationship with the United States.
It's just a shame they didn't get a real seat at the table.
Right. It really makes you think, what if one of them had been at those negotiations? Could they have gotten their sovereignty recognized? Could they have drawn some firmer boundaries, maybe even made that neutral buffer state a reality? It's impossible to know.
It's tough. History happened the way it happened.
Exactly. But thinking about these what ifs, it just shows how important it is to have different voices, different perspectives in those big moments.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it just goes to show you something like the Treaty of Ghent. You think it's just some old piece of paper, but it still matters.
Oh, totally. The things these leaders were fighting for, land rights, sovereignty, we're still dealing with those today. That's what makes all this so relevant. History isn't just in the past.
It's like this echo, right? Still affecting us.
Totally.
So is there anything our listeners can do to learn more about all this, to get involved?
Yeah, actually, our sources mentioned a few organizations. We'll make sure to put that info in the show notes.
Perfect.
Tribes like the Shawnee, the Sauk and Fox, the Six Nations, the Choctaw Nation, and the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, they're still going strong, and they're carrying on the legacy of those leaders we talked about.
That's amazing. So much more than just what you read in a textbook,
100%.
Well, that was quite a deep dive. We went from a treaty that supposedly put everything back to normal to, well, the exact opposite.
Yeah, for real.
The Treaty of Ghent. It might seem kind of forgettable at first glance, but underneath it all, there are all these hidden agendas, unintended consequences, and just this long, long struggle for justice. It really makes you think. Anyway, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
They made the coke illegal and the earth began to scream, you're on the move. And the fathers of the Lucy's tried to show your little Lucy's where to go. Went down to the station, see if Lucy in the sky was going free. When Captain Louis grabs me just as I was passing all along TV. Well, he apologized and said that Lucy in the sky learned to fly. So I sold him 20 lessons and told him little Lucy's never lied. So your mother calls your father just before your apple eyes begin to cry. And your doctor said Eliza was a